Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, the anatomy of anxiety, understanding and overcoming the body's fear response. Anxiety is very prevalent in our society. I myself have shared about my own struggles openly on numerous occasions here on the podcast, and quite recently, I released an episode all about unwinding anxiety with one of the world's renowned psychiatrists, Dr. Judd Brewer. It's episode 312, Unwinding Anxiety. Today, I am speaking with someone who takes a holistic approach to mental health, and I really resonate with that. Dr. Ellen Vora is a holistic psychiatrist, acupuncturist, and yoga teacher. She takes a functional medicine approach to mental health, considering the whole person and addressing imbalance at the root. Dr. Vora received her BA from Yale University and her MD from Columbia University, and she's board certified in psychiatry and integrative holistic medicine. She's the author of a brand new book called The Anatomy of Anxiety. She looks at things like sleep, technology, nutrition, gut, inflammation, hormones, breathing, and so much more. She differentiates between true and false anxiety. False anxiety doesn't mean it's not real or valid. It means it's preventable. It originates in the body and it's really preventable. True anxiety is a signal that something else is out of balance in our lives, in our relationships, and in the world. True anxiety serves as our inner compass, she says, helping us recalibrate when we are feeling lost. And we need to pay attention to it and lean in. In today's episode, we talk about both. I have to be honest, I feel exposed in this episode as it became quite personal, but I think it has so much great information that I am willing to put my discomfort aside and share this truly mind-blowing conversation with you. I also want to mention that this guest surprised me a lot with her rare ability to be fully present, attuned, and compassionate. I truly fell in love with her. What a warm and big-hearted human being. In her book, Dr. Vora offers nothing less than a paradigm shift in our understanding of anxiety and mental health, suggesting that anxiety is not simply a brain disorder, but the whole body condition. Some key points from today's conversation: why you should rethink your relationship with caffeine and alcohol, how managing your blood sugar level can significantly improve the symptoms of anxiety, what to eat for better mental health, the meaning and invaluable importance of feeling all our feelings, and the benefits of crying, and so much more. Instead of asking, how can I stop feeling so anxious? We should be asking, what is my anxiety telling me? Please enjoy this truly eye-opening, heartwarming, and important conversation with Dr. Ellen Vora. Your book is so affirming. It's like, wow, you just put my entire life into perspective and I really don't even have a problem. It's fantastic. So I already recommended this in our podcast community. We have a support group. We discussed it. I gave it to my neighbors. So my entire circle right now is talking about your book.
Thank you so much for your support. I'm so glad it's resonating. I mean, it's an incredible feeling to put something like this out into the world and just hope that it actually syncs up with how people are feeling and what they're struggling with. And so I'm really glad to know that.
Yeah, you're different. Definitely. You have some radical points in there, but that's not my point. I'm not here to challenge you, but I want to get as much good information as possible. You are a holistic psychiatrist, which I love, but I would love for you just briefly tell what that means. How different is your approach to mental health and as a psychiatrist, because you're not your typical ordinary psychiatrist.
Yeah. I think it's somewhat arbitrary, how I refer to myself. But what I mean when I say holistic is that this is not thinking about mental health just from the neck up. I'm really thinking about the whole body, the whole person, the whole portrait of a person's life. And mental health is not just our brain chemistry. It's not just our genes. It's not just our thoughts and our behaviors. It's largely determined also by, the quality of our sleep, our nutrition, the state of our gut, whether or not we have community in our lives, access to nature, whether we find meaning and purpose, whether we get sunshine and movement and fresh air, and all the way to what our ancestors went through is something that we carry in our DNA. And so I think that when I think about mental health, it's just, there is no limit to what is pertinent.
Yes. So you divide the book into two parts. You talk about anxiety as true anxiety and false anxiety, which totally makes sense when you read the book and understand it. It says in the cover of your book, 40 million Americans suffer from anxiety. I know a lot of people, including myself, who suffers from anxiety, and a lot of moms in my community, we talk about anxiety. I've been always looking for solutions for myself, and my anxiety has become stronger and I would say more debilitating in the past year. And honestly, a lot of the things that you say in your book, I had true anxiety and I had false anxiety. So I would be happy to be your guinea pig and you can ask me questions. If we come to a point, I would be happy to open up. But I would love for you to clarify what is false anxiety, what is true anxiety. Let's start from there.
So yeah, this is the central thesis of my book. And it really has to do with the fact that I was taught to classify anxiety in a particular way, to think about it as, as somebody struggling with generalized anxiety disorder or panic disorder with or without agoraphobia, OCD, and so on and so forth. And, to go to all that trouble with the nomenclature, it really needs to be for good reason. And the idea is that it helps with our research studies and it helps get reimbursement from insurance companies, and it's supposed to steer management. But I don't actually find that it meaningfully informs what I'm going to do with a patient. What I've observed is useful instead is to actually think about anxiety as these two categories. Someone is either struggling in this moment with false anxiety or with true anxiety. And as you pointed out, plenty of people have both going on. So we have to do some discernment. But false anxiety, it's anxiety that's based in the physical body. It's physical anxiety. It's avoidable anxiety. And I don't call it false to invalidate the very real suffering that occurs in false anxiety. Believe me, I was in a state of false depression for about probably a decade. And that was life-altering real symptoms. But it turns out for me, it was related to being on the birth control and eating gluten that I don't tolerate. And so making those two physical changes, I walked away from that diagnosis. So calling it false speaks to the physical basis and the straightforward path out. And I find that that's a very hopeful and empowering way of looking at it. Meanwhile, true anxiety is purposeful anxiety. It's not something that we should be pathologizing or trying to medicate away or trying to gluten-free and decaf coffee our way out of. It's not something we want to suppress or silence. We want to develop a practice for honoring it, listening to it, really heeding its message, because I think it's here as a deep inner wisdom. It's an inner compass, and it has a call to action baked into it that we would be best to understand and take action on. So True anxiety is purposeful anxiety. And that framing, I find, actually meaningfully steers management when I'm working with a patient, and it helps us help them get relief and also translate their suffering into some kind of purposeful action.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So let's go to the book for a moment. You write in this chapter, I think it's, I don't know, chapter 3, maybe, I don't know. It says, in my practice, I start with the assumption that anxiety is a blood sugar issue until proven otherwise. I was like, wow, this was me my entire life. So tell me about this. So many of us are walking these days. First of all, we're eating crappy food to begin with, right? Our food industry. Second of all, we have the technology. You write about all of this in your book, but I want to get as much info as possible from you. Before I ask you a question, are you familiar with Johann Hari? So he just wrote a book. His latest book is Stolen Focus. And I just interviewed him, right? I love him and his work. And you two go together so well, your books, because you talk about the same stuff that is so harming. Of course, he's talking about attention, but you talk about anxiety. So let's talk about food, anxiety, as you write in your chapter, the blood sugar. What's going on?
Yeah. And Johann Hari, he's just brilliant. His books are incredible.
Yeah.
And Stolen Focus, I can't wait to read it, but Lost Connections was transformative for me. So anxiety, or what I term like the anxiety we get when our blood sugar is crashing and we're hungry. This is a really important takeaway. Basically, here's how the body works. When our blood sugar spikes, it's chased by insulin, which causes our blood sugar to crash. And when our blood sugar crashes, it induces a stress response in the body. That's just the design. I don't make the rules. It's the way the body's designed, and it makes it so that the stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, they cue the liver to break down the storage of starch that it keeps, and then it restores our blood sugar to normal levels. And that's good. It kind of saves the day, but it creates this 5-alarm fire in the body, and it feels synonymous with anxiety and panic. And it's really avoidable, but it's common because the modern American diet is built on a foundation of refined carbohydrates and added sugars and coffee drinks that are secretly milkshakes and rosé all day. And so we are all swinging wildly around on this blood sugar roller coaster. And when our blood sugar crashes, we're experiencing unnecessary anxiety. So I like to recommend, in an ideal world, that somebody overhauls their diet and eats in a way that's blood sugar stabilizing, but that's not always possible or easy. We can't snap our fingers and overhaul our habits so easily. There is a hack that I found has been helpful for many of my patients, which is to take a spoonful of something like coconut oil or almond butter and to do that kind of prophylactically a couple hours before our regularly scheduled blood sugar crashes. And so in my household, we'll do this around 3 p.m. and then right before bed. If I'm ever going to be out and about in a place where I'm not sure that I'm going to have something to eat, I'll take a spoonful before I leave the house.
Well, excellent advice. I started implemented that the moment I read the book, and it makes a huge difference. And I have a friend who is similar to me, and she always identifies with her anxiety. It's like a badge of honor. I am panicking now. I have a panic attack and I have anxiety. And I said, listen, this is called false anxiety. Let me explain to you that the moment you change your diet, I said, have you eaten anything today? She's like, yes, I have eaten 3 little zucchini patties. And it was like 4:30 p.m. I'm like, that's not enough. And so it makes total sense. And I started implementing. So when you say coconut oil and almond butter, do you mean protein and fat, correct?
I think there are a lot of options that work, and it kind of depends on what somebody is open to using. So I used to just recommend coconut oil. I thought of it as a really nice option. It's like it's, this kind of pure fat. So it takes a while to digest and a while to be released into our bloodstream and gives us this nice safety net of blood sugar that can blunt a crash. But I had enough patients to sort of gag when I tried to recommend eating a spoonful of straight coconut oil. So then I started softening the recommendation and being like, okay, almond butter. And yeah, I get the question a lot, like, is peanut butter okay? And it's okay, but if possible, to spend a little bit more and get almond butter, just because peanuts are not as nutrient dense. They can be a little more inflammatory. They can be moldy. And, it's a legume. So it's just not as well tolerated by most people compared to nuts. But really, if there's something that you like if you want to eat a Brazil nut, if you want to eat a handful of pecans, go for it. It's something that's going to give you a nice slow release of blood sugar.
Yeah. Great advice. Great advice. I did eliminate peanuts from my diet entirely for the past 1 year. In fact, I eliminated a lot of stuff, right? As my anxiety became worse in the past year, because my father passed away suddenly from COVID, and he wasn't in this country. Well, talk about anxiety, loss and grief, true anxiety, right? That's serious stuff. And if you're not eating well, if you're experiencing blood sugar crashes, if you're drinking caffeine and everything has this cumulative effect, I was getting panic attacks to a degree that I was not participating in life because it was debilitating. And I talked to my neighbor one day and she said, I think you should see somebody. So I started seeing a therapist and I changed my diet entirely. I said, I'm not going to drink caffeine anymore. I don't drink alcohol, so that was not an issue. I'm not a sugar consumer. So a lot of things were easy. I'm a healthy eater to begin with, but I even cut down lectins and things of this nature, dairy and gluten completely. It's been about a year. And oh my gosh, what a difference, right? Coffee was like, wow, my generalized anxiety went away immediately. I'm like, holy cow. So I was never even anxious. Panic attacks, I haven't had a panic attack in months. So I totally resonate with your work. And I'm like, wow, this is so great that you are courageously putting this out there, because this is not conventional knowledge, right? This is going against the culture. But it's going to help and change so many people's lives.
I'm glad you think so. And yeah, that caffeine piece. I mean, I don't think caffeine is inherently bad. I have plenty of friends and patients who actually tolerate coffee just fine, but it's just worth being aware if each individual, are we the person who maybe is a slow metabolizer, who is sensitive to caffeine? And it's the reason I keep having this very unpopular conversation in the world that people should rethink their relationship to caffeine is exactly success stories like yours, where somebody was their whole adulthood, a real love affair with coffee and a love affair with anxiety. And then, I don't know if it's a love affair. And then when they get off of caffeine, it's almost like the anxiety, just the wind has left the sails and they're just no longer even questioning whether they even identify with that diagnosis anymore, just from the intervention alone of getting off of coffee. And so I keep having that conversation, even though I catch a lot of flack for it. Nobody likes it, just in case it might just drop in the hands of somebody for whom it can really change their lives. And I want to just come back to, I'm really sorry to hear that you lost your dad.
Yeah. And today is the first anniversary, actually. So today was a very emotional day for me, but that's why I took it slow. But I'm going to share something else about true anxiety, because I think it's worth speaking up and sharing so that other people can relate. I don't want to hide my things from people, and my listeners know that. So thank you. I appreciate it. I can see how it impacted you. I just dropped it like that in the conversation, and your face, you're a very empathetic person. I can see that, it affected you.
Well, I mean, I've lost a parent as well, and I know that pain, and I know the grieving process quite intimately. And I have a lot of strong views on the ways that,
yes. I lost my mom when I was 13. So talk to me. I know everything about loss and grief, but when you think you are healed or you're better, some unexpected things happen, right? So when I talked to Johan Hari that I quit coffee, he was so inspired. He's like, you're inspiring me to quit coffee. So that's a side note. But in terms of true anxiety, when I talked to my neighbor who is a stranger completely, and I started crying and she said, I think you should see somebody, I started seeing a therapist. And I asked him that I want to see you because of anxiety and things of this nature. And only after like several sessions, we started talking about anxiety. And then I said, I lost my dad. That's why I'm sad. I'm grieving, I'm low, etc. Like I knew that's the root. But what he asked me was, what is your anxiety telling you? And that question, that was this opening, this portal. I'm like, that I don't have parents anymore, that I'm an orphan. He says, no, like tune in. So I tuned into this feeling, what I was feeling, and I was crying and I was experiencing it severely. What it came down to, I was so mesmerized. And there's the true power of the therapy too. It's a long story, but I'm going to give you the short version. Believe me, I think you're going to use it in our conversation. I started talking and I said, like, I don't have parents anymore. I don't have grandmothers, grandfathers. I don't have uncles. Only I have a lot of people who I've lost from both sides of my family. And I have an aunt and an uncle. And I said, and when I was sharing, through therapeutic intervention, I said, I don't have elders anymore. Like I am becoming that elder now in my lineage. And I just started crying. And that was my breakthrough moment, that holy cow, like I'm this big grown up and I'm going to hold the line now. And I don't have elders who are going to protect me. And it just made me feel so vulnerable. But I stayed with it and I felt it. And, he was very helpful. I cried, I journaled, I wrote, and it felt good. Like in that moment, I felt so tiny and small that no, I don't want to be the elder in my family. Like I want to be someone's daughter. I want to be someone's niece and a little child and someone's grandchild. But I realized that this is the meaning of life. Like, no, this is my time. I didn't mean this to go this way. I'm sorry. I can see that you are a little taken away. And, but this is the true anxiety. And I felt some ease and comfort in my body. I'm not scared of death. It turned out that was not my anxiety at all. It was a lot larger and bigger. And when I talked through and felt and cried, and I'm still crying, I'm okay with that now. There's no other way, right? You have to make peace with it. You can't change your life. You can't change the facts. So now it's your turn.
I just want to clarify. I don't know, you said, was I taken away? No, I'm right here for this conversation.
You are, but I didn't want this to be, you're here as a guest. I want to interview you and I don't want to put you in this position that you are my therapist now and listening. And I can see it affected you deeply.
Well, I think that, I appreciate you sharing this because I think that this is helpful for listeners. And it is a really good example of what we're talking about with true anxiety. Mm-hmm. And in a way, I think that so many thoughts come to mind about this. I do think that losing your father also conjured up memories of losing your mom. And if you were 13 when you lost your mom, you had some, somewhat mature faculties for handling that, but also, not a completely fully developed adult. And so in a way, like your sweet little 13-year-old brain did its best to understand and integrate that and make sense of it. But I think having another parental loss in adulthood, now this fully formed adult brain with so much more wisdom and learnings can reevaluate the ways that your body kind of compartmentalized and integrated and made sense of losing your mom. So it brings it back up, but I think with an opportunity to sort of reshuffle and reorganize. But it also means going through that grief again. And it's reminiscent of what you went through before, probably when in certain ways, it's harder when we're younger. It is more life altering and it's more tragic. And I think that, there's something really incredibly poignant about this feeling of being orphaned and then realizing, it's so hard to not have elders. Mothering is the sweetest nectar and we just want it. We all want more of it. But also to recognize that now we are the elders and we step into that role. And that gives us a feeling of purpose, right? Like this is exactly that sublimation of the anxiety into purpose that I'm alluding to, where we need to step in and kind of recognize this is a hard path, but it's a high calling. And that nectar of mothering, we are in a position to give it to other people. And just a last reflection on this. I think that when we have true anxiety, we're a model patient in many ways. It's asking us to slow down and pay attention. It's saying there's something big here that's not a bite-sized soundbite. It's not something that we can just grasp in a moment. It's something we really need to stay with and be curious about and let it unfold. And that's exactly what you did in that therapy session. And then there's a gift in the communication from our true anxiety. It's here to communicate so much important messaging, but we just have to be available for it. And then we can really, it doesn't feel quite like anxiety afterward. It feels like
doesn't. Yeah.
It's the full exquisite catastrophe of just being an adult, being a human, having a human experience, grief and rolling with that. And I think just a final reflection on this is that grief itself is something I think we really have to, our culture needs to rehabilitate its relationship to grief. We don't do a good job rolling with it, embracing it, diving into it. The trappings of our lives, our jobs don't create space for it. And I think we each as individuals need to push back against that and make sure that we really give grief its full, what it deserves of our attention.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. I recently interviewed Hope Edelman. She's the author of Motherless Daughters, Motherless Mothers. She authored 8 books and she's phenomenal, an amazing voice in the grief community. And her latest book, The After Grief, is, I think, the best book on grief I've ever read. It's not like there's 5 stages to grief. No, this is forever, I haven't aired that interview yet, but it's really, I resonate with her work so deeply. I know you lost your mom when you were pregnant. I can't imagine that experience, you becoming a mom and losing, this touch with your own mom, this connection. Do you mind if I ask you just a little bit about like how that felt for you? How did you experience that?
Yeah, the book Motherless Mothers was really important to me at that time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no other point of reference other than to be pregnant and to lose my mom and to lose my mom while pregnant. So I haven't had either of those experiences in isolation of the other. But I experienced it as kind of a deepening of both. Like my grief took on this childbirth-like primal quality where I was really rolling with these ocean waves of grief while kind of acquainting myself with this baby and preparing for labor. And I remember my sister said the most profound thing of all, because I remember being at my mom's funeral and I was crying and somebody said to me, and it came from a place of love, but it wasn't a helpful message. She said, "Be strong, don't cry." And I knew that she meant like, be strong for the baby. And fortunately, I'm a psychiatrist. And so I know that me bottling up my grief and my emotions was not actually what was going to serve this growing fetus the best. And I knew to roll with my emotions, but my sister really framed it beautifully. And she said, the placenta filters the sadness and all that the baby feels is the love. And it's really framed even just my understanding overall about grief. Grief is this most exquisitely poignant and often painful expression of pure love. And Glennon Doyle has a beautiful way of talking about how grief is the receipt that we've loved. And if we grieve deeply, it means we really loved. And what a gift, right? That's a blessing. And if we have deep grief, it means we had a relationship that was so deep and important in our lives. So I don't know. I mean, it was tough to have a newborn. It's always tough to have a newborn. And it was really sad to me to not have my mom there. But it's forced me to call into question my worldview and it's basically necessitated for me. This has just been my choice, is to find meaning in these unfoldings of my life. And not to say it happens for a reason, but just to spin as much meaning and resilience from it as I can. And the final thought is that, when you say you don't have elders anymore, what I learned when I had my daughter is that in certain ways, my mom was there for me even more in spirit form than she could have been in physical form. She helped so much. And I think it's my worldview that we do have elders, and we have them 24/7 and kind of exactly when we need them in exactly the ways that we need them.
Yeah. Yeah, when I say that, like, I meant in a physical form, because when they're here in a physical form, you still feel that protection, that energetic connection. It has a different flavor. You feel impoverished somehow when, you lose someone from your lineage, from your family, and that circle becomes smaller and the energy, I don't know. But of course, I know what you mean. We are connected and guided, and I do believe that. But for me, something shift that day when I recognized that, and I'm okay with my anxiety now. Like I said, a tremendous shift happened in my body too. For me, anxiety was always manifesting in the body. I always had somatic symptoms, and I could never relate to the ruminations, the worrying that people described, the cognitive kind of anxiety. And so, your book speaks to people like me. I'm sure that there is other solutions for other people. And I recently interviewed Dr. Judd Brewer, who wrote the Unwinding Anxiety. I could not relate to that book. I tried, believe me, I studied that book very, very hard. I try to apply it, but it just does not resonate with me. It just does not, because that's not my anxiety. I like some aspects of his, work, but I was very skeptical from the beginning, and I had so many questions in the end. I think he's brilliant. I really love his work, but it's not for me. Let's just say it that way. What do you think about his work?
Well, I need to first mention, so I listened to your interview with Judd Brewer, and I thought it was a great interview. And you mentioned something that I want us to talk about.
Okay, let's do it.
It was a real, I took some notes on my phone because it was a real missed opportunity in the conversation. You mentioned almost in passing that when you were having these panic episodes where you wanted to run out of the doctor's office, that they had done some blood work and found that you were anemic.
Yes. Yeah.
And, there are a lot of potential causes of anemia, and that's its own separate conversation. Is it pernicious anemia? Is it dietary? Is it related to chronic inflammation or a bleed somewhere?
I'm going to come and see you. Just FYI, I know you're in New York. I just want to work with you. Okay, please continue.
But anemia, which I feel so remiss, I don't think I mentioned it in my book. That is a very
you didn't.
Definitive potential root cause of false anxiety. Because if you're anemic, essentially your blood can't hold enough oxygen. So all of the cells of your body feel like they can't catch their breath. And that itself is such a feeling of anxiety. But then furthermore, it necessitates a stress response because your heart gets the memo that your cells are not getting adequate oxygen. And so we need adrenaline and cortisol to coax the heart to beat harder and faster, to pump the blood around our bodies more rapidly, to do our best to kind of meet the needs of the energy exchange happening in our cells. And so to be anemic is almost to guarantee put you into a state of anxiety. And the solution there is not even, habit change. It's not 7 years of therapy. It's simply not being anemic anymore. And so, which is easier said than done, depending on the cause of the anemia. But sometimes it's actually a very straightforward remedy of repleting iron stores with, I think chicken liver pate is a really nice option for repleting iron stores. And so I'm curious where you're at with that now, and if you're still anemic or if you've been able to do follow-up work on that.
Well, I have not done follow-up work. The last time I was there, it was before I gave up caffeine and I started doing my own things about food, right? Because of that anxiety, panic attack that I had at the doctor's office, I can't go and take another blood work. I am debilitated. But now I feel like I can. I'm at that point. But before, I just couldn't go right after that experience. It's been a year now. At first, my iron was 4. And then that second time when I had an anxiety attack at the doctor's office, it was 8. So it was still on the lower end, but a year has passed. So I have not done a blood work and I have not taken an iron pill, but I do feel a lot better in terms of anxiety, in terms of changing my diet, and in terms of I don't feel fatigued. Like previously, I couldn't vacuum my entire place. I would feel exhausted. I would clean the counter and be out of breath. Now I can even exercise, strength training at the better place. And so I want to believe that I am, I have good iron, but the cause was never identified because he would think, my doctor, internal bleeding, all those crazy, scary things. But because I was very anxious and I was traumatized in the medical field already, I had a C-section and, a panic attack right there. I was an earthquake survivor. I'm claustrophobic as it is. Now I'm having a C-section and I want to run. So I have a lot of medical trauma. And now you're telling me to go to get a colonoscopy because I may be, bleeding internally. Like I just couldn't move on because of my anxiety with my medical, testing and that kind of stuff. So I don't know where I am now. But since my anxiety is better, I think I can go for a blood work. I mean, come on, I should be able to do that, right? I'll bring my husband with me, or someone. But I think I have to do it just to get some picture, what's going on.
I was also thinking in response to that you should look into home phlebotomists, someone who comes into your home, sort of like the way I think that medical trauma is very real. And I don't think it's a very humane setting so much of the time. And I also very much appreciate, what conventional medicine has to offer and the ways it saves lives, thank goodness. But it's not a very patient-centered experience. It can be so activating. So even just something as simple as having the phlebotomist come to your home where you can stay more co-regulated with that context might be an easier way to go about it. But yeah, I mean, in the meantime, it doesn't hurt to replete iron with nutritional stores. And I think that iron pills are complicated because they can be constipating and inflammatory, but food sources of iron like chicken liver pate and red meat is great. And I think it may not have to come to the colonoscopy. If you can successfully correct it with food, then I think it becomes less likely that there's some kind of bleed ongoing, but you would want to follow up and check over time. But I think that the medical trauma too, I mean, this was about a year ago. You were not only in the midst of potentially losing your dad at the time, but related to COVID and related to being at a distance from him. And so I think that there's just so much that goes into that. And we also have to recognize, I think there's a false anxiety component to these aspects of the pandemic. Like it's often the responsible choice to wear a mask and to see other people wearing masks, but that also impacts how we're breathing. And it is a little bit unnerving to see people in masks. On some intellectual level, maybe it comforts us, but on a sort of deeper imagery archetypal level, it's off-putting to not be able to see someone's full face and their facial expressions. And we have associations through our art and our collective unconscious of masks, kind of being related to fumes and war and all of these sorts of things. And so, I think all of that is also ginning up our stress responses.
Oh, so true. Hey, do you love the podcast? Show your support by becoming a patron on patreon.com and join our 15 existing members who believe and support the work of authentic parenting. Patreon is a place where creators, artists, and podcasters get support from their fans. Your contribution makes a difference. When you become a patron at any level, I'll send you a handwritten thank you card with some awesome authentic parenting merch, a tote bag, a pen, a t-shirt, a mug. You'll be part of the special Insiders Circle and get other benefits as well. Discounts on my services and offerings, extra content, and of course, exclusive access to me. You can stop your contribution at any time. A lot goes into the production of the podcast, and I truly need your help. Head over to patreon.com/authentic parenting. The link is in your show notes as well. And join other big-hearted and generous listeners from around the world. It's not the amount that matters, it's the fact that you give that matters. After all, I created this podcast and built our community on the notion of giving. We have different levels of support starting from $2 a month. If you break it down, it comes down to 50 cents per episode. $2 can't even get you a cup of hot drink in a major US city. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being part of our global, diverse, and strong community. Your support truly matters. Simply visit patreon.com/authentic parenting and choose a level of support today. Again, visit patreon.com/authentic parenting and choose a level of support. Now, back to the show. Wow, you're so intuitive and wise. And somebody just posted the other day on Instagram for the second anniversary of this pandemic, a collage of photographs like that. And I was going through it, and they highlighted, the pandemic life aspect of it, some good pictures, some fake positive things. But I saw this image with masks, and it was a kind of dark image, and it hit me so hard for the first time. And I started crying. Like, I don't know, I couldn't explain that feeling, but obviously it's not over. We're still wearing masks, but that just, I don't know, it touched something in me. It reminded me of past traumas, of, global suffering that I also have witnessed. And it was so sad that just the masked image, it touched me deeply. Wow, I didn't intend to go this way with this conversation. I have so many notes. I was going to ask you so many different questions. But I think the food, the diet, the inflammation is so key. Not many people talk about this, and people suffer unnecessarily. And you say, what I want to ask you, what to eat for mental health. Let's talk about a little positive things. Change the flavor of this conversation a little bit. What to eat for mental health?
I mean, I wish I had a more concise answer, but let me do my best at it. It depends, right? And I hate that's such an irritating answer. But in a perfect world, if we sort of lived on what I jokingly refer to as Whole30 Island, where it's like it was just easy and ubiquitous and what everyone was doing to eat a paleo template diet balanced with, well-sourced, ethically raised protein, like from an ethically raised animal husbandry, over to starchy tubers like sweet potatoes, plantains, and some veggies and healthy fats throughout. And if that was just what food was everywhere you turned, it would be great to just eat that way in general. Balanced, nourishing, grounding, nutrient-dense, real food. And the trouble is that we don't live on Whole30 Island, and it becomes really difficult to eat that way. I know, I'm living proof. And I think that that's where it's a delicate balancing act, where we want to feed ourselves nutrient-dense, nourishing food, not from a place of self-negation or punishment, not from a place of orthorexic obsession with doing things perfectly.
I love that word.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like, it's a real phenomenon.
Yeah, but to do it from a place of ease and anti-fragility and trust and pleasure. And our world makes that really difficult. So sometimes trying to eat the right way is itself anxiety provoking. And those are the times when we have to actually loosen our grip on it. but overall eating more balance. I think that's what we're really missing. I think our great great grandmothers kind of knew intuitively what a balanced meal was, and that was tradition that was passed down generation to generation. We knew how to nourish the population, and these days we don't pass down traditional wisdom around food. We've sold out our food wisdom to the highest bidder, so it's really just we get our food pyramid with industry interests from the government, and it couldn't be more wrong. We almost have to like flip it on its head. And so I think that in a way, you just want to eat the way your great 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 grandmother tried to eat, which is a really balanced, nourishing plate that's protein and starch and veggies and fat. And that's what gives our brain the raw materials that it needs to function. That's what keeps our blood sugar stable. That's what keeps us not inflamed. And it makes it a lot easier to go through the stressors of our life.
Yeah, like you mentioned fermented foods. I do make my own fermented vegetables. But the convenience foods are so easy. The junk food, it is so hard. It's almost like a part-time job to eat healthy and maintain that, because you're going against all the temptations, right? And it's very, very hard. I know it. But it's worth it because we're eating for our own mental health, for our own physical health. And how about children? You're a mom. I was going to ask you a question about this too. Even though your book is for adults, but the same applies for kids. So many parents are complaining about their children, quote unquote, misbehavior. And my approach to parenting as a therapist is the same holistic view. When people come to see me, I'm like, tell me about your diet. What do you feed your kid? Sleep, everything. And they're like, no, my child just has behavioral issues. I'm like, trust me, its behavior is not in isolation. A child can have a blood sugar crush. A child can have this inflammatory food responses. A child can go through those false anxiety signals in their body. And that reflects to their behavior. And here is people trying to treat the behavior and miss the mark. And I've known this forever. Intuitively, I took on my conferences. But when you wrote this book, like, I really want you to say a few words to parents, of children.
Yes, yes, yes. So you caught me on a day where I'm feeling kind of feisty about this. So let's go there.
Okay, let's go. Even though you're such a calm.
Well, I try my best to feed my daughter well and, nourish her. And children, I think, give us a very, very crisp, stark indication of false moods, right? So when her blood sugar crashes, she's in a meltdown. When she eats processed foods or something with food coloring or preservatives, like it impacts her behavior. And the reason it irks me so much, what's normal, what's celebrated is, every birthday party, which is like every weekend, you have to have the cake and the icing and the pizza and the soda and the juice boxes and the candy. And it's like, here, we're going to give your child an epic meltdown and enjoy, and I think that it's really kind of violent. And I'm not here to say like, no more cake at birthday parties, but it is kind of violent because when my daughter comes home from these parties and has an epic meltdown from these foods, it's very uncomfortable for her. It's very uncomfortable for us. And thank God, I know that this behavior is a response to a physiologic state of imbalance. But I think back to my childhood when I was wigging out on all the processed foods I was eating, and I felt ashamed. And I think my parents looked at it as like, what's wrong with her? But it was really kind of what's right with my body. My body was rejecting these poisons. And that's actually served me in my adult life. I'm a precious, precious, sensitive snowflake. And my body says no to so many things. But if I really am honest with myself, my body says no to things that aren't all that healthy. My daughter's body very clearly says no to things, but they're just part of life. And we're trying to give her a normal childhood experience. But it's sad to me to think that other kids are going home, having their meltdowns. And then the parents are like, what's wrong with Timmy?
Yeah.
And calling it misbehavior when it's a very automatic response to these incredibly dysregulating foods.
I know. I mean, if you eat Doritos, right? What is Doritos? Like, I didn't grow up in America, so it's a little different for me. Like I didn't grow up eating all this American foods. Like I didn't grow up having snacks or anything of that nature or the packaged foods. So I grew up in a completely different environment. Everything was handmade, handcrafted, homegrown. We made pasta from scratch. I helped my grandmother. I have memories of this. For the entire winter, you ferment food, you preserve foods. So for me, this is a foreign thing. But of course, my child is growing up here, and it's not like, no, like I'm this super duper. My child never touched a Dorito, or no, she has experiments. She experimented with both healthy and unhealthy foods. She's 14 years old now. And the good thing is I have given her enough background. Now she can discern. Yes, I can give her candy in her lunchbox, just a couple of pieces of candy or chips some days with a healthy, meal. But she knows what's right, what's wrong. And she has so much to say about the school cafeteria. She understands. Does she eat healthy all the time? No, but at least she understands what certain foods do to her body as they grow older, and we have this kind of conversations, how her mood changes. Like I see that, like she turns into a completely different person, that you don't want to deal with that person. It's like, wow, this was like huge change. What happened? Oh, she ate chipotle, or oh, it was some other street food, right? But many parents, I want them to hear this message and not feel bad that they're not cooking at home. This is a tough one. This is a tough one, but it can make such a big difference, even if they overhaul their diet and 80-20%. If it's 80% healthy foods and whole foods and 20% like chips and junk food, I agree with that. I mean, that's okay too. What do you recommend? I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so hard. And it echoes what we were talking about, how when it comes to anxiety, just trying to always obsessively eat perfectly can sometimes be creating more anxiety than it's solving. And I think with kids, the trouble is that being too controlling about it can backfire. And then the child wants to rebel and sort of go off to the races with processed junk food. And so what we try to do is create a foundation of, at home or whenever possible, and it's tough, but we try to have real homemade foods for dinner at home, and then we eat those as leftovers for lunch the next day. And so that's the foundation. And so then we don't overthink it or over control, or sort of white knuckle things when we're out and about in the world. If we're traveling, if we're at a restaurant, if we're at a birthday party, we just let it happen. And then we do some gentle talking around, like, you're in this mood right now, and it might be related to that cupcake. And it's not shame-filled language. It's nothing like that. It's more just helping her start to name her feelings, which, for me, that was very profound and empowering, was to be able to name my false moods, name my moods and my false moods. So like, I'm in this mood as a result of something real going on, and let me really name this and talk about it and understand the texture of it. But also it's been really helpful for me to know, like, I'm in this shelled out, empty, pitted stomach feeling, and I just ate some gluten, and that's how I feel after I eat gluten. And to kind of just learn that about my own body. And we're trying to help my daughter know that about how her body functions as well, just so that it arms her with that skill for life, and she can navigate the choices and have lots of learning moments where she eats in a certain way and then feels a way afterward. And, it takes thousands of opportunities to learn that lesson over and over throughout our lives.
It does. My daughter, for example, now she's lactose intolerant. She never had milk in her life. She only had breast milk, and that's it. I never even gave her milk. But she's very, very lactose intolerant. If she eats ice cream out, it has significant impact on her. So she knows now. She chooses a sorbet or, vegan ice cream or things of this nature if it's available, or she may get a, drink instead of the ice cream at that ice cream shop. So yeah, we need to help our children. But a little child, I'm like thinking about little kids who are 3, 4. I have clients who send me videos and they say, this is the meltdown I'm talking about. And I always wonder, what did that child eat? How did that child sleep the night before? Like, what is going on in that child's life? And of course, a little child, like, even I didn't recognize the anxiety in my body, right? I thought it was a bigger medical problem. But how can a child even communicate, tune into their sensory, senses? And of course, they're going to have a meltdown and be feisty and kick and, do all those kind of behaviors. I think, we need to educate parents and help them understand that this is a serious thing. Your children are not misbehaving. They're not bad kids, but food can definitely impact an anxiety and stomach ache and cramps from gluten and things of this nature. And you may never know, right? You may never know.
I think that what you're saying perfectly encapsulates how our work is so complementary, because in many ways you're helping parents recognize, like, it's not misbehavior. These kids have fundamental needs, and we need to take a holistic view of, are they getting their needs met? Is something irritating the system? And my book is really here to say, yes, that. And adults are really just these enormous toddlers. In many ways, we have fundamental human needs, and we have a system that can get thrown out of balance. And basically, we just need to start understanding what needs of ours are not being met and what inputs are irritating our system and dysregulating us. And once we start to understand that, we do tend to have fewer meltdowns as adults. And also, I think meltdowns are healthy. A big part of what I'm also here to say is that life is stressful and we need to melt down. We need to cry. Our kids do too. And I think about my daughter, she's in first grade. She's learning everything about life right now, like how to make friends and how to read and how to do math. And it's like, this is some serious marathons her brain is running every day. And she needs a meltdown. We need a release after we go through challenging experiences. And adults, we're the same. We need to cry. We need to give ourselves permission to have those big releases and to not feel like it's an indication that we're in a bad place or we're weak or we've lost control. We really need to give ourselves permission to dive in and embrace that we go through a lot, and we need to cry, melt down, and sometimes scream and just release it. And so, yeah, the theme, the takeaway here is we're just big toddlers.
Say a little more about crying. I love how you say we have to rebrand crying.
Yeah, I think culturally we've really gotten crying wrong, right? Like every time we cry, we apologize. We're like, sorry. We feel like we're a burden to the people around us. And we try to suck it back in and make it as small as possible. And if we can manage to squeeze it back, we're like, okay, good. I didn't fully cry. And what? No, this was our body's wisdom telling us we need a release. It's giving us this opportunity. It's handing it to us on a platter. And then we're betraying it. We're denying that. And I think that instead of apologizing, can we just normalize it? And can we recognize that, we don't want to make a cry as small as possible. In many ways, we actually want to dive in and let it be really full and complete. And we feel better afterward. And we can also be on the receiving end, somebody who holds space for somebody else's tears. And how that's a really beautiful gift to give someone, is to give them the kind of body language that nods and says, it's really okay for you to be crying right now. You don't need to be ashamed. You don't need to hold it back. With my patients, even my patients who kind of know my attitude about crying, I still see them try to suppress it. And I'll always just say, before we move on to the next thing, can we just stay with this? Can you let that be more complete? Can you really roll with it and let it flow? And we still have trouble giving ourselves that permission. But I just want to keep fighting that good fight and telling everyone, give yourself that permission, let it be ugly, really try to cry more fully.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about self-regulation here on the podcast, and you talked about stress management and completing cycle of the stress. There's so much stress in our lives these days, and add in the technology, the screens, and lack of sleep, everything that we're talking about, the poor food. These are all stressors. Some of them are self-inflicted, self-induced, unnecessary stressors that we expose ourselves to, right? We can minimize a lot. And what happens oftentimes is we don't complete the stress cycle, right? stress has a beginning, middle, and end, but we constantly are in this snowball effect, constantly swimming in stress and never even resting. Stress meant to be in small bursts, right? And it's okay. We relax and then we recuperate, then we move on to the next stressor. We're capable. But these days, it's like we're bombarded and we're in this stress bubble all the time. And we don't even know what rest feels like for a lot of people. It's, yeah. And I heard you say in some interview that, and I work like that too, that you don't burden yourself like work wise. You don't see clients from 9 to 7 like nonstop, right? You take breaks and you manage your work so you can have balance and recuperate from your stress.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the stress cycle, it's something I really learned about through authors like Peter Levine and Kimberly Ann Johnson. And then, of course, Amelia and Emily Nagoski, who popularized it in their book, Burnout, which is a great book. And to understand that stress is a cycle is so profound and revolutionary. And we need to understand like the arousal cycle that has a beginning and a middle and an end. We are in a lot of very incomplete stress cycles. We have not brought it to resolution. And so the way we do that is through physical exercise or dancing or shaking or chanting or singing or journaling or painting or crying or cuddling or playing. And that's what tells our nervous system it's safe now to be in our body, and we discharge the excess adrenaline and we reset. It's like a control alt delete from the nervous system. My preferred way of doing it is shaking. I just find that that's so efficient and it feels good, and it just kind of excavates whatever emotions are stuck in my tissues and it really resets. And so I do that in between patients. But I think that, yeah, I realized I have no choice but to build blocks of space in my schedule. And the more I do that, the better I'm able to really show up properly for my patients. And I realized like I'm not just like when I was seeing patients back to back to back to back for 8 hours straight, I was like this provider on a conveyor belt, but I wasn't rested enough to access any of my intuition or creativity or sort of synthetic insights. And the more space I build in between patients, it's like this little shavasana. You integrate what just came up. And I'm much more insightful and creative, much more intuitive. I'm a better listener. I have more breakthroughs with my patients, with my writing, when I give my brain a chance to just stare at the wall for a few minutes in between patients. And so I think the memory that comes up for me is one time when I was really into yoga and I was kind of aggro about yoga. I went to this class with a guy who, after every single pose, you went into Shavasana for like 5 minutes. And I was so frustrated. And I was like, get me out of this yoga class. This is so lame. This is so slow and so boring. And this isn't good exercise. And I'm not going to have a, firm butt after this. And now looking back, I'm like, that's how I structure everything in my life is 5 minutes of Shavasana after everything. Integrate that learning, let your body organize it and make sense of it and glean the learnings. And so now I wish I could go back to that guy and be like, you know what, I had a bad attitude in your class and I have learned the wisdom of your ways many years later.
Well, you asked me in the beginning of this conversation how I felt today. And I said, today was the anniversary of my father's death, and I didn't have any clients. I didn't purposefully schedule any clients because I want to take the day for myself and walk and journal and talk to my relatives and cry and just be with myself, right? And I have only this one interview schedule, and that's fine. And I'm not going to cook dinner. I'm not going to, do any of these things. So you have to do that for yourself. It's otherwise you're not going to have spaciousness. And I love how you say you generate different kinds of insights. You listen to your intuition better. You're more creative. It's so true, man. It's so true. I wish every listener can take that as a lesson with them and live their life just like that. Simplify, minimize, declutter their life, their calendar, their day. It makes such a big difference. It does. People always ask me, how come you're so chill and you're so happy? Well, that's the reason. Like, I can see like a ton of clients in a day, or I can be this workaholic. I don't want to, or I don't post on social media all the time because I don't want to spend my time there. And that makes a big difference. All those little things, they add up, right? That's the quality of your life.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the role that privilege plays in this as well. And it's a
True.
different economic equation when you build spaciousness into your life. And for me, it's taken a somewhat leap of faith. But basically, if in the past I was sort of working too much and burned out, and then there are some economic comeuppances to that. Like you find that then you have to, then you have to be in therapy. You have, you engage in retail therapy. You buy the to-go coffees. You sort of, there are expenses that come with hustle, burnout life. But sometimes there's no choice in the matter, and you're just working as much as possible to make ends meet. I absolutely honor that. For me, I had to kind of take a leap of faith, which was I'm going to spend less and simplify my expenses and be able to work less, trusting that this is actually going to work, that life becomes less expensive when you're not as burned out. And I've also realized, and this is, I don't like how this comes off because it has that kind of conspirituality manifestation quality, and it might just be luck. I don't know. But the more spaciousness I build into my schedule, the more I tap into what feels like something kind of like a more like divinely assigned mission. And actually it's created more abundance in my life. But I think that comes on the back of privilege and luck. But I have been able to actually do bigger things the more I give myself space to connect to creativity and intuition. But I'm not sure that everyone is in a position to take that leap of faith. And I kind of knew that I'm a physician. I have that day job to fall back on. And that's a source of, it's a safety net.
Yeah. But even with someone who is working, a single parent who is working 2 or 3 jobs, even the changes that we are talking about, the changes at least that I'm talking about, everybody can do those small changes, like instead of binging on Netflix and burning attention and time and energy at night, you can preserve your resources, which is your time, your energy, and attention in my book, and prioritize your sleep because you don't have external help, right? You're working hard. Maybe you may not be like me, who doesn't see so many clients, or I don't work full time, like from 9 to 5. But again, like you, I simplified my life. I have 1 pairs of sneakers. I have very minimal things in my life. So you can still access, cost-free things that and do small steps that make a big difference in your life. I'm a firm believer in that. I think, yes, what you're saying is absolutely true. It is a privilege. But even the mom, even the dad who is working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and they don't have financial means or support, they can do certain things too to feel better, to gain some peacefulness in their life, to rest. I don't subscribe to this culture that, no, you don't know my life. My life is, no, you can choose to not do certain things still, like the screens is one thing. I don't know, going to certain places. Like you don't have to take your kids to 3 birthday parties in one weekend. You can choose to rest, that kind of stuff. I mean, you can make small changes, even if you don't have the privilege of saying, you know what, I wish I could work less. Knowing that your work takes up so much time from you and effort, you have dwindling resources. You really want to be mindful of the leakages of your resources.
I agree. And that's a big tenet of my book, is to basically point out that it does not have to be expensive to keep ourselves well. And most of the best medicine is free. And it does require a reorganization of priorities. That's absolutely true. But prioritizing an earlier bedtime, connecting to nature, getting outside, doing 30 seconds of breath work or a little bit of shaking, all of this, and transitioning from processed foods to real foods always feels expensive initially and then ends up being more affordable because then you're cooking from home more. You can use frozen veggies. You can buy dry rice in bulk. There's so many inexpensive ways to do this. And you not only save money at the cash register, but you also save money in terms of disability and quality of life and at the pharmacy.
And you create traditions for your family. You connect with your kids, you connect to yourself. I think there's so much we can say about this. Let's say, when you cook from scratch something, when you cook, you are engaging a different part of your brain than when you're daydreaming, right? The default mode network is no longer activated when you're cooking something and you have to follow either a recipe or just a task positive activity. That can have a very positive impact on your well-being, just that small tweak, right? Instead of ruminating on your worries or daydreaming, which is not that helpful for you, you can connect with your kids, you can gather up. It doesn't have to be elaborate. You don't have to go all organic, all whatever. You can eat healthy foods on a budget. I strongly believe in that. It actually costs less to eat at home than eat out.
So I agree. I'm noticing we're very aligned on these things, and I could talk to you all day, but I want to honor the fact that this is the anniversary of your father's passing, and this is a really sacred day. And I want you to have that spaciousness to be with that. And so
you're so sweet. Yeah. I'm going to come and see you in New York.
You're welcome here. Yeah. Where are you based?
I'm in Princeton, New Jersey.
Oh yeah, we're close.
We are close. Yes. I want to thank you. What is your final message to the parent or to people who struggle with anxiety? What is your hope with this book? If you want to leave them with a few quick tips, I'm not in favor of those kind of quick fixes, quick tips, but if you have a bigger message or what is speaking to you right now based on the conversation that we had?
Here's what's coming up for me after our conversation. I think that keep your blood sugar stable, just conscious choices around things like caffeine and alcohol, and recognize if you might be inflamed or if there's work to do on healing your gut. But then give yourself permission to feel your feelings, to have a big cry, to grieve properly and fully, and prioritize community, prioritize sleep. But I think what's coming up for me right now is really just the message of hope. And we have a mental health system that tells us our mental health is a genetically predetermined chemical imbalance. It's a destiny. And I don't find that to be true in my practice. And just as with our kids, we don't have a bad kid with misbehavior. We have somebody with unmet needs, or maybe they're dysregulated, and there's things we can do to support that. And the same is true for adults. We really just have a lot of unmet needs, and there's a lot in our modern environment that dysregulates us. But there are things we can do to chip away at all of that. And so just a message of hope. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this was a true pleasure. And thank you for holding space for me. As you could see, I was also like, I'm burdening you, but it feels great, even through Zoom, to see your facial expressions. I can see, how empathetic and sensitive you are.
I love what I do. It's a privilege to do this.
I absolutely love your work. I love you. I'm a big fan. And can I just say, you are on TikTok, a psychiatrist who is on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, but I don't use social media, period. I'm only on Instagram, like barely half-assed. I don't even want to be on there, but you are on TikTok, and I'll link to everything that you have, all your social media, your book, all your resources. And you have bite-sized little blog posts on your website, which is really great. I love that. You're going with this modern theme. Nobody has attention. Let me give them just a quick little bite-sized nugget. I love that. So thank you so much. I will also link I will link everything. So I don't know if people want to work with you, if we have listeners from around this area, you never know. Like I said, I want to come and meet you.
Anna, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, if people want to learn more, my website is ellenvora.com, and I'm at ellenvoramd on Instagram. But really, my life's work is encapsulated in my book. It's The Anatomy of Anxiety. So I really hope it can be helpful. But thank you so much for having me on. And I'm wishing you a really sacred day with grief and connecting to your elders in spirit form. And yeah.